I've always wanted to do this, and there's probably a little part of me that thinks, if I'm not going down without a fight, and so that's what I'm doing here. I don't think because it's hard, it's a good reason to stop.
Hi there, and welcome to What the Earth, featuring smart and personal conversations with experts and thinkers working to solve today's biggest environmental problems. I'm Mara Welch, senior writer with NRDC, and I'm here with Alex Adams, Chief Policy Advocacy Officer with NRDC. We're talking about the first year of Trump's second term. So, Alex, I'm glad that you're joining us today. I personally think you have one of the most interesting jobs at NRDC. As Chief Policy Advocacy Officer, what do you do on a typical Tuesday?
Well, I've been at NRDC for 13 years now, which seems kind of amazing to me. I think my job is super interesting. I never imagine other people do in the same way. Mm-hmm. But I lead our Center for Campaigns and Organizing. And so I am really charting the course for how we're handling federal advocacy, state and regional advocacy, campaigns, and a lot of congressional work, how we're trying to analyze and fight back against some of the worst threats legislatively, both federally and in the states we work in.
From where we sit right now, I think it's something like 4 blocks to the White House. We're speaking with you this week because we're about to mark 1 year since the beginning of Trump's second term. Yeah. How does this administration compare to past administrations in terms of your day-to-day work?
This is actually different from any administration before, including Trump's first administration. The difference here, I really believe, is that, we keep hearing about norms and past precedent that people follow. And this administration isn't doing that really at all. And there's a real question on how legal a lot of their actions are, too. So, in our day-to-day work, we do a lot of advocacy on the Hill. We, anticipate what's going to make the most sense from an environmental perspective. We really try to make the case. We lobby on the merits of an issue. That used to follow a certain set of guidelines that people really observed in Washington. And I think there's a lot of confusion now is, what's legal? How are we behaving? And do any of the old norms still stand?
Mm-hmm. I feel like the term unprecedented is something that is thrown around a lot, but this past year, I feel like it's just gone to the next level. And as someone who's just in it every day, day in and day out, what made you decide to stay in this work?
I've always wanted to do this. And, there's probably a little part of me that thinks, if I'm not going down without a fight. And so that's what I'm doing here. I don't think because it's hard, it's a good reason to stop. And this is the hardest it's ever been, mostly because, we were really looking previously at making progress on things like climate change, on getting lead out of water that, young children across the country are drinking. And now I'm really thinking about how do we get back to basics? How do we defend the Clean Water Act and Clean Air Act? How do we make sure that people can be confident that the water they're drinking isn't toxic? And that's a real mind shift when you go from really thinking we can make progress, we can grow and we can build as a country and we can have all of these positive environmental outcomes to realizing that you're kind of hanging on to the basic things that most people in America think they're getting and may not realize they're not now.
Yeah. I feel like something I've felt and a lot of people have felt over this past year is like, I can't believe we're debating these things again. I thought that we had moved on. So yeah, it's been a wild ride. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, you, Alex, the person. I know that you said that, everything that you do in your work feels personal because you genuinely care about it deeply. That's probably why you got into this line of work.
I grew up by the ocean. I'm a Floridian. The natural world is very present in my mind. The ocean, the wildlife that was always around me, the reason people were there was because of that. That is something that I kind of keep with me, even though it's been many years since I've been there, that we're not really that removed from the world around us. And ignoring the reasons why people choose to live where they live or the things that you think they take for granted, but really at their hearts, they don't. I don't think anyone in Florida would be excited to see more drilling rigs off the coast or risk another, oil spill. We want to be able to enjoy all of these things that make this country beautiful. And I was really lucky to have that. And so I think in my mind, even now that I live in Washington, D.C., none of those things are very far from my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. When you think back to, Inauguration Day 2025, just about a year ago, day one, there was a slate of executive actions. It was pretty overwhelming. It was a big statement. To you, what message did that send to the American people?
I think we heard a lot, for those people who are following along, with either political writers or watching the news, we heard the term flood the zone a lot. And I think it became a little kind of trite, but it's a real tactic to try to put so much out that it's overwhelming. It's confusing. You can't follow it. And, part of how I view my work here is that I want to be able to help the American people to understand what's happening in this space where I do have some expertise. Because a typical person day to day, they have their job, they have their family, they're busy. They don't have time to, go online and see what Congress is debating in any current day. And if that happens to be an environmental issue that's going to impact their water quality, that's something I'm going to do. My team is going to do. We're going to do that here and we're going to fight back for them. But I realize it is a full-time job analyzing all of the things that are happening right now. And so the flood the zone approach worked. I think there was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of distress. But most of all, a lot of things got buried. And I feel like it's our job to make sure they don't stay buried. So, for example, the administrator of the EPA, Lee Zeldin, rolled back the safeguards for PFAS, forever chemicals in water. That's something people need to know about. It can't get buried because those are chemicals that could potentially impact fertility. It could cause cancer. These are, really toxic chemicals that we shouldn't be drinking. And so if that's happening, it shouldn't get buried in an avalanche of news that the administration is putting out for just that reason.
Yeah. And I feel like trust and access to sound science and consistent, clear information is something that has been seriously impacted over this past year. And, NRDC does a lot of research. We have a science office. Can you speak to, if at all, how your team works in that space?
Yeah, we really rely on our science office and our scientists here. And that was one of the reasons I wanted to come to NRDC all those years ago. Truly, what I think is heartbreaking for me is the disintegration of reliance on scientists by the general public. And I see it all the time. And I think this administration is doing a lot to speed that along. I know that, as I look at what HHS is doing and RFK Jr. is doing as he makes decisions about toxics and health issues, the kind of disdain for science is something that really jumps out at me. And so what I really try to make sure we're doing is we are working with our scientists to ensure that any data that we're presenting or any sources that we're looking at are peer reviewed, they're accurate, and they can help kind of stand strong against that general kind of resentment about science that we're seeing.
Looking back on the past year, to me, one of the headlines of the first year of Trump's second term is, one big, beautiful bill, this major legislation that passed last summer. And the word big really sums it up. It was all encompassing. It touched so many aspects of American life. In terms of what it meant for the environment, how would you sum it up?
Insane, disastrous, tragic. So to be clear, we call it reconciliation only because that's a legislative term for how you get something passed in Congress. For the average American, this is a big budget bill. The goal of this bill was to provide tax cuts for the wealthiest in this country. And when you have a goal like that, you have to look for money in other places. And the places that were rated for this money, for those tax cuts, included clean energy tax credits, healthcare subsidies, as most people are finding out now, which is really distressing and tragic, and a lot of other projects that people don't really think about, but they expect as an American citizen. There was a lot of cutting on public broadcasting and all the rest. I think what is really striking to me about this bill is that it cut at the heart of a clean energy industry that was creating massive amounts of jobs throughout the country. It was providing people with cheaper energy, especially at a time where we're seeing data centers pop up and the cost of those are being put on the American consumer. And what was really kind of a wake-up call for me as somebody who's been advocating in Congress for many years is I didn't anticipate that members of Congress would vote against the economic interests of their own states and districts. I've seen a lot of bad legislation over the years, and I've seen people do things in the name of economic benefit that were really kind of harmful. But I really thought if something was both an environmental win, an economic win, a jobs win, that there was no way that was going to get cut. And they did. And what's really fascinating about this is that President Trump himself really dislikes wind and solar energy for reasons that I certainly don't understand. And during the negotiation of that bill, it was widely reported, this isn't any secret news, he reached out to Senate Leader Thune and said to him, get rid of all of those clean energy incentives. And they cut as close as you could to doing that. And so, jobs are not going to be in places in this country where they were going to be. We're not going to have cleaner energy. We're not going to have cheaper energy. We're going to be paying more. The air will be worse. I mean, these are just basic things. And what's even more interesting is this happened in a lot of red states and districts and blue states and districts. This is something that actually is, punishing to a lot of states and districts that, expected President Trump to really look out for them. And in my mind, it showed such a shift in where we are now in how this administration, this president is going to approach energy, environment, health, all of it. It's just harmful on so many levels. And that's the moment where I realized, okay, this is going to be different. We're going to have to think of a new way of approaching this. Yeah.
Yeah. When I think about kind of the vibe of this past year, to me, as someone who cares about clean energy, the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 was, I believe, the most significant clean energy legislation in history. It was this massive investment in homegrown clean energy resources, major job creator. And I think something like 80% of those benefits were popping up in red states and red districts. And one of the main things that the Big Beautiful Bill did last summer was it slammed the brakes on that.
Yeah.
How do you make sense of this shift?
It's really such a unique time in history because it's one person's view on energy. So President Trump likes oil and gas. He spent a lot of time with oil and gas industry. It's an industry that could be on the verge of really kind of dying off in not too long a time. And I think an industry like that with as much power that has been taking our taxpayer subsidies for as many years as it's existed is really going to have that last gasp where it really makes a play to be relevant. And, President Trump has made that happen. Here's what I think, though. I care about clean energy because I'm thinking about climate change. I'm thinking about, what's in people's air and water. And that's my job to do it. And that's why I want to do it. The average person wants to turn on the light and they, of course, would like it to be clean, but it's not something they can consume themselves with every day. And you wouldn't expect them to. They don't want to pay extra money out of their wallets to oil and gas industry leaders who are already uber wealthy. They don't want their energy to be polluting. But at the end of the day, they turn on their light switch and the lights come on. And I think what people are going to find now is that those energy bills are going to become more expensive over time, especially as we see data centers pop up as they consume more and more energy. And, there was this great opportunity to create more jobs here, to free ourselves of, the kind of international, incidents that can happen over oil and gas, and to, create those jobs and let people have communities that are powered in a way that benefits those communities. And that, as you said, is kind of just halted really quickly because of the disposition of this president and this administration. I also think, though, that people are going to be really annoyed by this really soon. People expect their government to provide them with basic services and to keep them safe and to do what is in their best interest. And this is not in the best interest of most communities, plenty of red districts and states, as you said, and, the nation writ large. So I think that the way I see it is it's a real backslide for us as a country, but it's not permanent because people will realize that they're not being given what they deserve and that this is, in the long run, such a retro kind of sad way of running a nation as great as ours could be.
Can you describe how is this already starting to show up in people's lives if you were to talk about like any given family in America where it might start specifically popping up?
Yeah, I mean, I think what you described is sort of the struggle I have in my work, and that you could have some really positive movement happen either in the federal legislature or in a state legislature, but you don't see the impacts until a little while down the line. And by then it's really hard as a citizen to identify which policies and which laws contributed to that positive, outcome. Right. I think what people are going to see now are disinvestment in their communities from clean energy industry. Mm-hmm. I think they're going to see increases in electricity bills. I think they're going to, over time, there's going to be issues when it comes to air quality and water quality. Now, those are things that happen in a kind of long-term way. Again, back at our problem of it's hard to identify exactly which lever shifted your day-to-day life. Right. But as people see that, and as NRDC, our job is to help them understand what those things are because, we want people to have the best information so they can help protect their families and themselves. We'll be able to identify, I think, pretty easily and connect the dots to which policies have led to, some of these worst outcomes. Mm-hmm. The health outcomes, I think, take longer to identify. Yeah. And that's really hard for me as someone who really cares about this. I think, when I got into this field, I learned about some of the cancer clusters that existed. I learned about, what some of these toxic chemicals can do. And so that kind of gives me a little bit of heartache in a way that's different from, people getting angry over energy bills, which is also important. But these things are all happening. They're coming. And I feel really determined that we can help people understand why they're happening, and we can make a difference and make a change. Yeah, because so many of these impacts will be massive and they will be down the line. I think about my mother grew up in Leominster, Massachusetts, also known as the Pioneer Plastic City, also home to a pretty big paper industry. And decades later, a lot of people in that community and the surrounding communities were having serious health impacts, cancer, respiratory issues, et cetera. And it's so important that we learn from the past and correct course because we're able to. And we had already been making so much progress. And how do we communicate that cause and effect to people who aren't doing this work every day? And like you said, don't have time to constantly be thinking about it. And that is, one of NRDC's jobs. And it's the job of the rest of the environmental movement too. That's such a great way of saying it. And I think that what you identified, from a personal perspective, a lot of people experience. And I do think that's one of our most important jobs is to help prevent that where we can and help shine a light where we aren't able to prevent it. And so I think I'm seeing almost what feels like the beginning of that type of issue again. And it's one of the things that drives me absolutely crazy is that you see, at Health and Human Services, RFK Jr. talking about, making us healthy and getting rid of toxins. And then, down the street in Washington, you have the administrator of the Environmental Protection Agency rolling back protections from forever chemicals, PFAS, in both our water, but also they just approved the use of PFAS in pesticides. So now we really have lost control of some of this because they're going to be sprayed on all of our food. And, because they last forever, you don't really get a say anymore. And so I think it's that sleight of hand that's happening with this administration, where, their hope is that people are looking at, taking red food dye out of food down at HHS, and they're not paying attention to the fact that the EPA is exposing us to toxic chemicals that could impact people's reproduction. It could give you cancer. And by the time that happens, they're hoping that nobody can really trace it back to these actions. And it's our job to make sure that we are documenting these actions, that we're litigating against these actions, that we are, letting every possible group that cares about this know that we're sharing solid scientific data on all of this, which we are doing. And in a communications landscape that we're in now, with people kind of getting curated information on social media, it's harder to do. But that just means we have to be more creative and work harder and, kind of make sure that our kind of promise to our members and to the people who are impacted by this is fulfilled by this work we're doing.
Yeah. That contradiction, you see it happening between, for example, HHS and EPA.
It's maddening.
Stunning, right? It's like, how are, we standing for this?
The nerve.
Yeah, I know. And how are they getting away with this?
Yeah.
But I think, people are going to realize, people are going to start to realize what's happening. It's going to become clear.
Yeah.
This can't continue. And, if NRDC is to succeed in calling out that hypocrisy, what are some of the most important things you think we need to do?
Well, first, I think, the American people the American citizenry is a motivated citizenry, and they ultimately want from their government what we all want. And I think all of the divisions we've been talking about are manufactured in some ways because we all want to be able to drink clean water. None of us want to risk cancer just because we live near a place. We don't want pesticides in our food that are going to harm us. By putting the call out to industry that this administration did to just say, what do you guys want? How can we make you more money? I think the population of this country is going to reject that. And it's all about timing, and it's all about how we can help move that along. Some people really care about the environment. They care about climate change, clean energy, environmental health, or wildlife. Some people, care about disease prevention. Everybody has something that's near and dear to their heart. And for the people who do care about environmental health, which I think is a lot, it is our job to provide them the information they need and to speak on behalf of people who can't. And so I think in order to do that, we have to do a lot of what we've sort of been gearing up to do, which is increasing our advocacy in the federal legislature, really expanding in states where there can be forward momentum that can push back against the worst things that we're seeing at the federal level. And that's a place to really be hopeful about. You have governors in states like Maryland and Colorado who are really working to try to push back against this and provide a safety for their citizens. And then I think we really, litigation is important. And I think that, people rely on NRDC for that, which is, one of the things I'm proud of, the work that this organization does. But advocacy is its own unique thing. And we have to reach people with information they care about. And there's a million ways to do it. And we're really looking at a lot of them because I came here in large part because I knew this was a trusted institution. I've trusted our scientists and our lawyers. I still do to this day. And I'm kind of proud to be able to work alongside them. And so I feel like it's my job to, honor that work they do and make sure I'm getting that work to where it needs to go.
Yeah. Can you speak to one policy change that is most personal to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think because this is my work, it all feels personal. But I think what I described before about the misdirection between HHS and EPA feels the most personal because I like control over my choices. And I feel like putting forever chemicals in pesticides that are going to be sprayed all over this country takes away my choice about what I can and can't choose to eat. It doesn't matter if you're eating organic food if, the water that's used to irrigate it is filled with these chemicals. So that felt personal, not because, I'm different from anybody else, but because I think in this country, we think we have a choice of what we can and can't consume. And some of that choice is being taken away. And it's doing it in kind of a deceitful way because it's doing it under the guise of making America healthy. And so that felt offensive to me.
Yeah. It is kind of mind-boggling that it's being done under the guise of expanding freedom when clearly what we're hearing and what we're seeing is very different.
Yeah. It's about the choices you have as well. Like, there are communities that wanted to choose solar energy because it's cheaper. Yeah. It's easier for them. It's less volatile. And it's less polluting. Now they don't have that choice. Yeah. The administration is stopping some projects for no reason. And they're asking that clean energy projects get personal approval by the head of Department of the Interior. And that's never happened before. These are things that don't really make sense. And I don't think that we're in a point that's irrevocable. I think that people, if they want to see better outcomes early, now is the time to really speak up. I know it feels a little bit like, there's all this damage. How do we turn it around? What, do we have to wait 10 years until we're really looking at impacts that we can't control? And I think that this is fixable. And I don't think it's because one movement or another movement needs to do more or less. I think we as a population need to kind of realize what we all care about. And I think some people have had different viewpoints based on some misinformation, based on personal experience. That's all legitimate. But there's been a movement with this administration to empower the wealthy and empower industry above the average person. And I still believe that all of us share the view that that's something we don't want for many reasons. And so I think that not as a movement, but as just a person who cares about things that I know somebody, that I used to work with in Georgia cared about, or somebody in Illinois cares about, or California cares about. I think those things are far more similar than we're giving them credit for now. Yeah. And we're being kind of sold a bill of goods that none of us agree. And some people are right and some people are wrong. And I don't think that's actually true.
I totally agree. I think the vast majority of people, maybe everyone, wants the same basic things. Health, safety, affordability. Yeah. They want their loved ones to live long, happy lives. Yeah. We want to walk out our front door, feel safe, going to work, a job with dignity, basic stuff. And you're so right. So much of what NRDC is working toward and the environmental movement is working toward is really basic stuff. And it shouldn't even be as politicized as it has been. And they've really stayed pretty consistent throughout NRDC's long history. We've been around for about 55 years. Yeah. And I think that we can learn a lot from our own consistency in the movement. Yeah. And I'm very glad that you're doing the work you're doing and your team all day, every day. It's not for the faint of heart. But it sounds like you genuinely feel hopeful. Like it seems like you genuinely feel like all is not lost.
I do, because in the end, I do have faith that the American people are going to, kind of really identify what we've just talked about, that we do want the same things. And I think we're in a really difficult time in our nation's history. And it's not going to be easy to get through this, but that we will. And, the little fighter in me is going to keep doing that. And I think that remembering the goodness in all of the people and all the communities and reminding ourselves of that, not letting the fractured nature of, the algorithms and all of the media that we're seeing that may or may not be in our best interest, to kind of shed that a little bit and get back to those basics we talked about.
Is there anything going on right now that you feel like isn't getting the attention it deserves?
Yeah, I think a lot about the biodiversity crisis, wildlife. I know there are so many people who care about it. So many of the people who work with NRDC care about it, but I think every average person, people are scrolling through their phones. They're looking at videos of animals in far off places, dog videos. They're looking at all of the other parts of our globe that are wonderful. And so I think, the issue of wildlife conservation and shrinking habitat and, animal protections, I think those are all things that, we all sort of care about in one way or another. Yeah. And we should be really thinking about how our policies impact that. And the Endangered Species Act is something that's been really important to wildlife in this nation for a long time. People want to see grizzly bears. They want to see wolves. I think it's, kind of iconic. And so just remembering that, there's plenty of work being done on how we coexist with predators. There's plenty of work being done on how to make sure that birds of all kinds can still fly over all of the places they have and in the communities we love. That's something I think about a lot. And I'm convinced that I'm not alone in that one.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. I think that that's a great unifier too. It's something that most people care deeply about. And too often we forget about it.
Yeah.
It's one of NRDC's big pillars: climate, nature, and health.
Yeah. And I think being a steward of, those ecosystem chains is noble and important. And, I think most Americans would feel that way.
Yeah. Were any of you mentioned that you did some volunteer work kind of on the side when you were working in PR in different industries. Were there any projects that you worked on that really gave you a spark?
To be honest, one of the most kind of wonderful things I worked on was here at NRDC when we really worked to protect the Northeast Canyons and Seamounts Marine National Monument off the coast of New England. It's about 100 miles away. There are whales and dolphins and deep sea corals. It looks like a Dr. Seuss book underneath, and there's rovers who have gone under into the deep water to see it. And it's spectacular, and knowing it's out there and it's, its protections have been put in question by this administration. And that's another thing to be, thinking about. But it's truly kind of a magical place, and knowing those places exist and that we can be part of working to protect them, that's a spark for me.
Yeah. Wow. What a great plug for volunteerism. Maybe someday you'll end up as Chief Policy Advocacy Officer for NRDC or a similar organization. What would you say to, an 8-year-old girl living in 2026, living on the Florida coast, who loves the beach and loves animals and who is aware of what's going on and is feeling a little nervous?
I think I would say that it is worth the fight. Things can turn out the way you want them to. The road there may feel a little unlike what you thought it would, but your instincts are right and the things you want are attainable. And find your community of people who agree with you on those kinds of protections and work really hard to secure them. And also, hope is a renewable resource, and we all have to remember that too.
Oh, I love that. That's so true. It's something that I think all of us need to remember and know that we have a role in keeping progress going and keeping hope alive. Because no movement in human history has ever enjoyed perfect linear progress. They say that we all show our true colors during the hard times, and I'm happy to be working with you. I feel like I'm getting choked up. But thank you for everything that you do with NRDC and beyond. And thanks for sitting down with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you. You are one of my favorite people to work with, and we'll keep doing it, and we'll keep keeping our promise to all the people who trust us.
That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, NRDC Flicks. We'll have new episodes every week.